All right, welcome back. My name is Mahad Beg, president of the DRS, along with Rafael Usman, who is the co-president of the DRS, and Rafael Abbasi, who is the vice president of the DRS at this time. Today, we're going over our second lecture in the series for Research for Beginners, in which we're going to cover basic vocabulary. So this vocabulary, if you know it, it'll make you 100% more competent to work with your professors, because your professors will use this vocabulary, or you'll see it on your IRB form, which is a very common form that most of you will have to submit or fill yourself. If you know what the terminology is or what it means, obviously you'll be more on track with everything. So your IRB form will contain it, and so will your professors use it. And so going right into it with experimental design, I don't think you guys will have to deal with this terminology as much, but I thought I should include it because if you don't know this, then it'll be very embarrassing because this is very basic information that people learn in high school. I wanted to include it just to make sure everybody is on track and everybody knows this, because we come from all different backgrounds, so maybe some of us don't know it, right? So there's something called an IV, which is independent variable. And this is a condition that you change, the thing that you're testing the effect of. So let's say, for example, you have an experiment where you want to test the effect of the color of light on the growth height of a plant. So the IV in this case would be the color of light, because you are purposely changing the color of light to see what is its effect on the height of that plant, right? Now you measure that height of the plant in centimeters, for example. So the condition that you measure, that is the dV. There's also something called the constant. The constants are the factors that you have to make sure are the same across all of your groups to make sure that only the thing that you're purposely changing is affecting the dV, which is the thing that you're measuring, if you remember. So in this example, you'll want to make sure that so you're changing the color of light on purpose, and you're measuring the height of the plant. So you should make sure that, for example, the plants that you use are the same species, right? Because some plants naturally grow taller than others, right? You want to make sure that it's all the same temperature, because you don't know, maybe the temperature can affect how much the plant grows. These things are called constants. There's something called a control, which is the condition which is most like real life, or the natural condition, or the average situation compared to the effect. This is going to be used in more like clinical trials, where if there's a standard procedure, currently a standard procedure to deal with things, then that is going to be the control. And you're going to test whatever additional thing you're doing against that control to see if what you're doing makes a measurable difference in comparison to what is already happening, right? So we have the x-axis and the y-axis, pretty self-explanatory, and we have the picture right there, where we have the y-axis here and the x-axis here. Mostly the x-axis is used for the independent variable. So over here you would have, like, for example, red light, green light, blue light, stuff like that, right? And up here you'll have the thing that you're measuring. So you'll have like 5 centimeters, 10 centimeters, 20 centimeters, right? So that's the y and the x-axis, just so that you know what the professors are talking about when they're using this terminology. So more terminology includes a literature search. This is often one of the first things that a professor will tell you to do is, okay, I like your idea, go ahead and do a literature search or a literature review on this topic. And the reason why they're asking you to do that and what they mean is for you to go onto the internet and see what other published articles there are out there on that subject. Because if there's already too many articles that have been published about the same subject, you should not do it, because it will not be a novel research project. And it will be better for you if you do something that's more novel and contributes more new information to the field. A procedure, very self-explanatory, step-by-step directions on how you will conduct your research. SPSS is the most popular software for statistical analysis, and it's from Microsoft. It costs money, so it can be tough, because you also need this software to be able to open a lot of the statistical analysis that is sent to you from a statistician if you get that far. But we'll get to all of that later in subsequent lectures. The IRB, Institutional Review Board, it's basically the ethics approval. and you need this for basically all of your research. A lot of it can be exempted as well, especially for our purposes. But usually if you want to be safe, then you should apply for IRB exemption. But you will usually always have to deal with the IRB, the Institutional Review Board. Usually your supervisor, if it's something that has to go through the full IRB process, your supervisor, or AKA the faculty member who is on your research project, AKA the principal investigator, which we'll also look at, is going to be the one who goes in front of the IRB and answers their questions about your research. Okay, another terminology that professors use is called something called the pre-validated questionnaire. If you design your own questionnaire, you'll have to go through a lot of hoops to make sure that it gets approved and is like overviewed by the specific personnel who have the credentials and qualifications to know whether that questionnaire is effective, and that can take a long time. So to skirt around that, what you might want to do is use a pre-validated questionnaire. This is what most professors encourage you to do. And a pre-validated questionnaire is basically any questionnaire that you see used in a already published paper, unless it says otherwise, like something related to copyright. So that's another thing you want to watch out for, is to make sure that you're allowed to use that questionnaire. Sample size, I hope that that's pretty self-explanatory. It's the amount of people or samples involved in your survey or what have you. And it's usually calculated online using a software like RowSoft sample size calculator, for example. There's other calculators as well. And we'll go into how to calculate that in subsequent lectures as well, because once you go there, there might be some confusing terminology there as well. And your professor can also guide you on that. A rationale is a justification for your research. Why are you doing that research? How will it help people in this field and abroad? What is the purpose of it, right? Convenience sampling is a method of sampling in which you just approach everybody around you. And snowball sampling is a kind of convenience sampling in which you ask your friends to fill out a survey and then tell your friends to go send it to their friends, which is why it's called snowball, right? We have random sampling, and for that you would have to develop a system in which everybody can be approached at random. For example, maybe you have a list of all the people that are included in your sample size, and you assign each one of these people a number, and then you put it into a randomizer, and you approach people based on what the randomizer says. That's random sampling. Study tools include any software and equipment you use to analyze or collect data, like Spss or Google Forms, specific calculators. The methodology, pretty self-explanatory, I hope. It's basically an outline of your procedure and study tools, how you apply them, how you go about your research. An IRB form is a form that is provided by the IRB, and it's available on their website and contains many questions that you'll have to fill out regarding the details of your investigation. A principal investigator is the terminology used to describe the supervising faculty who you are working with. A co-investigator is you. It's the person who's working with the principal investigator. A cover letter is a component of the IRB requirements that is used to introduce your project. And we're going to go into all of these requirements in more details later as well. We'll also have to look at what is a synopsis and protocol, which is another component of the IRB. Synopsis and protocol are basically the same thing. For the overwhelming majority of professors, they're the same thing. And there's a consent letter, which can get kind of confusing. People sometimes get confused with informed consent, which is point number 7. But consent letter here, usually what the professors mean is the consent from the centers which you're conducting your research. For example, if you want to go to a specific medical college and hand out your survey in person on their campus, then you need to have permission from the officials of that campus by giving them a consent letter and getting it signed. And the IRB will often require this if that's what is in your procedure or methodology. Informed consent is in the beginning of every questionnaire or in the beginning of every experiment that you want to run. If it involves a human subject, you should take their informed consent. And for that, you'll have to draft up a very detailed form that will guarantee that everybody signing that form understands what they're getting themselves into. A GAT score or scientific committee approval letter is something written on the PI checklist available on the IRB form website. It's a checklist of the things that you need for submitting to the IRB. A GAT score and a scientific committee approval letter does not usually apply to us for our level. It's usually for PhD level thesis research, Again, it's not usually concerning us, so we don't really have to worry about it, especially if we're using pre-validated questionnaires only. Inclusion criteria is the people who will be included in your research, like your sample, pretty self-explanatory. Exclusion criteria is where it gets a little bit tricky. It's out of the inclusion criteria. That's the trickiest part that people don't seem to understand very easily, is that if you will list your inclusion criteria, and within your inclusion criteria, if there's specific kinds of people who you will not want to put in your study, you will exclude them. For example, if your inclusion criteria is females under 30, depending on what you're researching, you might want to exclude those females that are pregnant, right? So that would be in your exclusion criteria. A placebo is mostly for experimental research. For example, you'll give somebody a sugar pill instead of a real drug, just so that you can eliminate some of the bias. We can go into that more specifically later, but for our level, just know what a placebo is so you don't embarrass yourself. Plagiarism, what plagiarism means is basically stealing somebody else's work, stealing somebody else's writing. Never copy and paste anything as a general rule. Always try to have every third word be different, at least. That's a general rule of thumb. You don't have to follow it to like an exact degree. There are some things that you won't be able to avoid, having 3 words the same in, but the most that you can avoid doing that, the better, to avoid plagiarism. There's lots of softwares out there that you can use to check to see if how much similarity there is between your piece and others. For example, turnitin.com. Often they do require payment, which is unfortunate. I'm sure that there's some free softwares out there as well. But if you have a connection by which you can access turnitin.com, that's even better. All right, well, that's all for today. Again, I'm going to attach the quiz if you want to make sure that you picked up and retained everything in this lecture at the end, in the description below. And if you have any questions, please don't be afraid to contact us. Thank you.